If you're into podcasts, you should check out our podcast, Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. It's about cold cases that were eventually solved. New episodes are released every other week. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Number 3. Evergreen Chapel and Morgue, Colorado Springs. DeLoss Powell was a hail fellow, well met, as they used to say. As the superintendent of the city's main funeral chapel, Powell had occasion to get to know just about everyone in Colorado Springs, both in life and in death. According to newspaper reports of the time, June 1904, everyone liked and highly respected Mr. Powell. Well, almost everyone. It seems that two of Powell's employees, Messrs. Quinn and Ayers, at the Evergreen Chapel and Morgue, felt that they were being stiffed, as it were. Their boss, they complained to the mayor, had been telling the city he paid them $28 each, but their pay stubs only amounted to $22, which meant that Mr. Powell was pocketing the extra $6 a week. The mayor immediately launched an investigation and called Powell onto the carpet. "I'm innocent as the driven snow," Powell claimed. And though he nervously explained away the discrepancy, he was clearly shaken by the accusation. As he left City Hall, one bystander told the newspaper that Powell brushed off queries about an upcoming funeral. "I thought he was simply anxious to get back to work," the bystander said. Powell rode back to Evergreen Cemetery and stormed into his morgue office, a witness said. He slammed the door and she could hear rummaging around inside. A few minutes later, Powell burst through the office door and staggered through the chapel's front doors, having just downed a half bottle of strychnine. Normally used for poisoning gophers, it seems Powell hoped it would poison him as well. But it didn't. As he choked a clod at his throat on the steps of the chapel, it appears he knew that the strychnine wouldn't get the job done. So he shot himself behind his ear with a revolver, not even bothering to remove his wide-brimmed hat. A few employees rushed outside and loaded Powell into a horse-drawn hearse to take him to the hospital. But after a failed surgery to save his life, he was taken back to the Evergreen Cemetery Chapel in that very same vehicle, and taken to the basement morgue for his own funeral preparation. In paranormal circles, suicides can account for an excess of spiritual activity. There's something about the suddenness of the death, the unsettled and unfinished business of it all. The ghost of DeLoss Powell is not an exception. In the centuries since his suicide, the ghost of Powell has been seen lurking in the chapel's basement morgue and wandering the grounds of the cemetery. Visitors have reported seeing a dark figure in a suit, wearing a distinctive wide-brimmed hat, who would appear out from behind the graveyard's large trees before disappearing behind them again without a trace. In 2010, cemetery volunteer Mike Coletta began to document some of the strange going-ons. He recorded himself investigating the chapel's basement directly below Powell's office with a K2 meter, which measures the electromagnetic field under certain frequencies. As his meter began to indicate the presence of those magnetics, he says, he got something out of the corner of his eye and turned his camera on it. What he captured scared him. It was a crypt door slowly opening on its own. Coletta posted his story to YouTube, which gained the interest of the A&E program, My Ghost Story. Though numerous bodies have gone through the Evergreen Chapel over the years, author Stephanie Waters tends to believe the most prevalent spirit is that of DeLoss Powell. So what makes Powell's spirit so restless? Probably the shame. When he was buried in the same cemetery that he supervised and stole from, town organizers decided to place him in an unmarked grave. Perhaps as punishment for his embezzlement and dishonorable death. Unfortunately, over the years, the location of Powell's grave has been lost to time, leaving him to wander the cemetery and morgue in search of a place to rest in peace. Number 2. Fort Worth Funeral Home, Texas. There's an old joke among funeral directors that goes, "Why is there no such thing as a haunted funeral home? Because no one ever dies at a funeral home." Okay, so it's not hilarious, but it's still a joke, and that's because most funeral home employees might not be as dour and dark as you perhaps think. There are countless stories of funeral parlor workers playing little pranks on one another during their off-duty hours. But for one particular fun-loving group of parlor employees in Texas, the joke ended up being on them. The following story comes from a 1977 article by Larry Roquemore of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. At the time, 3 employees of a local funeral home agreed to tell their story on the condition the writer changed not only their names, but the name of the home itself. The reason being, they didn't want to drive away potential customers who may be a little skittish about the afterlife. One of the home's employees, 37-year-old Ted, related his experience of hearing organ music coming from the chapel where the instrument sat. But when he came to investigate, he found the chapel's lights turned out and the organ lid closed. As he turned to leave, he wheeled around to find the musician's light above the keyboard had clicked on. He also relates the story of a teenage girl lying mangled and very much dead in the home's morgue. She had been a passenger in a small car that had collided with a truck earlier in the week. Her funeral had been scheduled for the next day, however Ted had not been responsible for preparing her body. When he arrived at work for the night shift, Ted sat at the office desk with his feet up when he heard a pecking on the window. Ted turned to see a woman in a white blouse with brown hair standing outside the window. Thinking it was the friend of another employee on the night shift, Ted waved her around front. When he went to the front doors to let her in, there was no one there. Later, heading downstairs to the morgue, he was shocked to see the teenage girl had a white blouse and brown hair, much like the girl he had seen. Another creepy story comes from Bob and Lee, 2 employees whose job it was to lead the funeral services for the departed. Lee talked about how one particular door in the parlor would swing open on its own, even though it had a weight on one side to prevent that very thing from happening. Slamming doors tend to rattle customers in a funeral home. Bob then spoke about how each time the door creaked open, he would find a small puddle of water where it opened, even if it was a dry, sunny day. Okay, so the last story might have some weird plumbing issues. Old houses, like this 100-year-old funeral parlor, are known to have some quirks. It was only later that Bob and Lee learned that at the same time of these door and puddle issues, there lay a man in a refrigerator drawer in the basement who drowned and had been unclaimed. According to Lee, only after the body was claimed weeks later did the door and puddle cease. For Ted, Bob, and Lee, the spiritual shenanigans came to a head in the early 1970s when they conducted a seance to find out who was responsible for the unsettled nature of this spirit salon. During the seance, they said, they were contacted from the other side by a man who claimed to be a friend of the home's previous owner, a grain magnate from Jonesboro, Georgia. During the seance, the spirit filled Ted in on the details. He said he resides here to protect the place, Ted told the Telegram, and that the spirit will only bring harm to those who do harm to the house. Thankfully, the 3 employees had no intention of doing that. In fact, there have been many times they've been tempted to quit altogether. One night, after hearing footsteps in the locked attic, steps which turned into dancing, he says, Bill waited with bated breath when the dancing stopped, and the footsteps descended the narrow stairs to the upper floor, right near the office. I went home ill that night, he said. While writing the article about the funeral home and its employees, reporter Larry Roquemore interviewed a teenage employee named Sam. He had only been working at the funeral home for 2 months, he said, and hadn't seen anything weird. The old hands are just superstitious, he told the Telegram. I'm not scared. But as the reporter left, Ted took him aside saying, be sure to interview Sam again after he's been here a few months. By then, he'd be a believer. Bet on it. Number 1. House of Wales, Cleveland. There's a 1979 song by Ian Hunter called Cleveland Rocks. And a line of the song goes, all this energy calling me back where it comes from. For researchers of the paranormal, that crude Cleveland energy maybe emanates from the House of Wales. It's a former funeral home that is said not only to be haunted by its former owner, but perhaps it may be a dark energy portal to hell as well. The building that houses the House of Wales, a 41-room mansion on East 55th Street, was built in the late 19th century by architect Frederick Steinbringer. It's so that Steinbringer chose his classical style so the rooms could generate energy and push it to the center of the house, perfect for the auditorium he built in the upstairs middle of the mansion. After its construction, it served as a German singing and social hall, a Hebrew school, a temporary hospital, and even a speakeasy during Prohibition. Then, in 1941, it was purchased by prominent Cleveland funeral director J. Walter Wills. Wills, the son of a former slave, was a well-respected African-American Ohioan. By the time he purchased the East 55th Street mansion, he was one of the richest men in Cleveland, black or white. Thanks to the mansion's monster size, Wills sectioned off parts of the house for non-funeral endeavors, converting the upstairs to an auditorium, meeting hall, and radio studio. Over the next 30 years, the reputation of the House of Wills grew as, quote, Ohio's most celebrated undertaking establishment, unquote. J. Walter Wills was such a noble Cleveland citizen that everything he did seemed to make the news. In 1956, he helped deliver a baby in his office when the mother went into labor while passing by outside. In 1963, the Wills received death threats during the Cleveland race riots that followed the assassination of civil rights leader Medgar Evers. Even his birthday made the news. In a 1953 issue of Jet magazine, it was reported that his son had gifted him an ornate clock that featured a miniature ballerina that would dance on the hour, accompanied by a tinny, haunting music box melody. When asked what had made him so successful, Wills pointed to his desire to make the House of Wills the best. He spared no expense, putting any money he earned back into the business. In redecorating his funeral home, he went for Graceland-style themed rooms. The dead could be sent off in an Egyptian-style viewing room, complete with ornate Sphinx sculptures, or in a lavish Grecian slumber room with beautiful mosaic tiles and faux marble columns. Wills also dropped coin on a fleet of 14 brand-new 12-cylinder Cadillac hearses, which he proudly lined up out front. He took great pride not only in the House of Wills, but in his personal image as well. Friends fondly remembered Wills in his later years dressed impeccably in a light gray suit as he drove around town in an immaculate white Cadillac. J. Walter Wills died on April 23, 1971, at the age of 94, in his bed in the upstairs residence of the funeral home. At the time of his going away party, hundreds of mourners came to see him off. But after he died, the House of Wills, which Wills passed on to his adopted son, struggled to maintain its former glory. Perhaps things didn't get off to a great start when, in 1974, the house took on funeral services for Donald DeFreeze. He was an infamous 60s radical and famously one of Patty Hearst's kidnappers. Upon announcing DeFreeze's services, the company's employees received death threats. In the early 2000s, thanks in part to the reach of Big Funeral, the House of Wills fell in hard times, and the company responded by secretly defrauding customers of $35,000 via prepaid funeral costs. An investigation by the Ohio Board of Funeral Directors soon followed, and the House of Wills had its funeral license pulled, prompting the family to quickly shutter the business in 2005. This closing was so sudden, in fact, that they simply locked the front door and walked away, leaving dozens of artifacts from its former life. Soon the looters, vandals, and urban explorers came to marvel at the Egyptian art and empty coffins left behind. And sooner still, those trespassers began to report some otherworldly experiences in exploring the House of Wills. One popular story went that visitors could hear footsteps and whispers as a dark energy began to surround them. Others would catch glimpses of a well-dressed man in a light gray suit who seemed to roam from room to room, accompanied by the haunting strains of a music box. Could this be the ghost of J. Walter Wills, who died upstairs? Has he grown unsettled by the decrepit nature of his once immaculate building, and despondent by the scandal that ruined his once good name? But as for that dark energy and the architecture designed to harness it, in 2010, a Los Angeles artist named Eric Freeman purchased the mansion with an eye towards renovating it to its former glory. "I don't believe in ghosts," Freeman told the Cleveland Plain Dealer in 2018. "I didn't before, and I still don't, but I have seen stuff here that can't be explained." But Freeman knows all about the dark energy in the place. He's a proud high priest of the Church of Satan. Perhaps another reason why J.W. Willis is so restless. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. Thanks again for watching.